every woman should be aware of her cycle and track it because this is your data. Your data is how you feel during the menstrual cycle. Positive thing because there's research to show that if you do have bad menstrual pain, doing exercise actually is helpful. And if you're exercising, blood flow, get the inflammatory markers going, help with all that sort of thing. If you're a coach or an athlete and you want to have that conversation but just feel uncomfortable, then actually make suggestions for that athlete to come with a friend or with the senior member of the team.
Dr. Nicky Keay, welcome to the podcast. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you about today about the topic of hormones and women's health. As a basically 31-year-old male, it's a topic which I know unfortunately way too little about, and maybe a lot of other male coaches know too little about this. So I hope that at least you can help both male and female listeners. So to get us started off, could you give us maybe a small introduction of who you are and your expertise and background?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to come and speak with you. So, I'm a medical doctor and I work particularly with athletes and dancers, trying to, well, effectively trying to help them attain their personal optimal health and athletic performance. That's what I do. And hormones definitely come into this, as we're going to discuss. So that's why we apply those. I mean, the simple principles that athletes have at their disposal in terms of their nutrition, their training load, their recovery, we look at those, but with the objective to optimize the response of their bodies in terms of hormones and therefore to drive those positive adaptations and improve their performance. So that's what I do. But I also, in that field, I do a lot of research in terms of hormones. For example, it started off many years ago now when I was working with an international medical team developing an anti-doping test for growth hormone. This is definitely not an advert, by the way, for athletes to take hormones and cheat, but the fact that actually they have been doing this a lot indicates that in if you're in the know, you know that hormones are really important. So that's when I first sort of got involved, and then I've done various other studies since then with athletes, looking at the effects of getting that right balance of nutrition and exercise, and the effects that they might have on their hormones and therefore their health. And also, I should say, from a personal point of view, the reason why I um, focused on this area is because as a youngster, I was very active. Well, I like to think I still am. I mean, I did competitive swimming, I was playing tennis, I was doing dancing, and it sort of was intriguing to me as a youngster, as a teenager, wondering what it was about doing this training that helped me improve. I mean, we all know instinctively that if you train, you're doing why you're doing that, of course, because you enjoy it, hopefully, but also you know instinctively that if you train, you will improve. But then I wanted to understand why, what was happening exactly inside the body. And so that's led me on to medicine. And then within medicine, I realized that actually hormones were going to be pretty key in answering my personal question and therefore applying it and giving that information to others.
How close are we to answering your personal questions? Have we gotten any closer through the research and through the science, or?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. That it confirms that hormones are pretty key to it,
Okay.
and there are ways of harnessing your hormones in a positive way. But also, I've through my research, I found out there are things that athletes do that think might be helpful, but actually they're not. And we might mention relative energy deficiency in sport in a bit, and this is an example. So yeah, I've definitely uh, come up with some answers for myself personally, and that's what I want to try and share with people to give them those tools so that they know, understand a little bit more what to do in practical terms.
Great. So, and this is exactly, I think, the topic that I wanted to dive into today. Um, I'm kind of dedicating March in terms of my research and my publications more around this kind of topic of women's health,
Mm,
mainly for me to learn, essentially, because as I said, I don't know too much. And maybe some of our listeners might not know or might have once learned about the
mhm,
different hormones involved in the menstrual cycle. So,
mm,
maybe before we get started, can you once again kind of remind us a bit of the cycle and maybe the important terms that they will hear about during this conversation as a reminder so
mhm,
they know what they're hearing essentially?
mhm. So, out of all the female hormones systems in the body, one of the most complicated and therefore beautiful, I would say, is the dance of the hormones that occurs every menstrual cycle in a woman. Pretty incredible. There's lots of fluctuations and changes just within each menstrual cycle. And given that a woman hopefully will have many menstrual cycles over her lifetime, that's quite amazing. But I think a few myths to bust. Number one, the menstrual cycle, of course, the evolutionary purpose of a woman having a menstrual cycle is so she can reproduce, i.e., so she can become pregnant. I accept that that is the biological evolutionary reason why we have menstrual cycles, but it's not. But actually, there are lots of benefits to having the menstrual cycle apart from being able to reproduce, because the hormones that are produced during this cycle are really important for health and therefore athletic performance. So, for example, the two main ovarian hormones produced by the ovaries of every woman are estrogen and progesterone. And estrogen is actually what we call an anabolic hormone. So it builds muscle and bone, especially bone, right? And obviously one wants strong bones. So sort of so the external manifestation of the hormones changing is to have menstruation, to have a period, to have a bleed. But actually, this is a sort of an indicator. I call it the barometer of internal healthy hormones. Free monthly medical check gives you a quick, easy, free check that your hormones are most likely fluctuating in the way that you expect is healthy, shall we say. So over the menstrual cycle, just to give people a quick reminder, breakdown of what that is. So every menstrual cycle starts with menstruation, starts with the period. So the loss, shedding of the uterus lining, the endometrium. And then we continue in that phase called the follicular phase when estradiol, the most active form of estrogen, is really ramping up, really taking off. And that triggers what's called the LH surge, luteinizing hormone surge, and that triggers ovulation. So an egg is released, and then we move into the next phase of the menstrual cycle called the luteal phase, so named because the remnants of that egg that was ovulated, that becomes what's called a corpus luteum in the ovary, and that produces a lot of progesterone. Okay, so that's the simplest way of thinking about the menstrual cycle. Starts off with a period, follicular phase, lots of estrogen, triggers ovulation, then the luteal phase, big levels of progesterone. If the egg isn't fertilized, then everything goes quiet again. All the hormones drop, progesterone drops, estrogen drops, and then that is the trigger for the start of the next menstrual cycle, the next menstrual bleed. So that's what's going on inside your body while that's happening. And these hormones are very important for health, like we discussed. But also, I accept that some women, every woman will respond to these hormones in a different way. So some women will say, listen, I have a menstrual cycle, no problems, everything's fine, don't feel much different. But other women can say, oh, I feel really different, either in a good or a bad way during the menstrual cycle. And so we have to acknowledge and accept that every woman is slightly different in her personal biological response. So getting to understand and seeing for the individual if there's some pattern to how she feels over a cycle will be really helpful in helping her, giving suggestions how to maximize her performance throughout the cycle, which is obviously what we're aiming for. And so that this starts, menstrual cycles start. When do they start? All this, the hormones wake up. The axis starts ticking over. This is called menarche when periods start. Average age is 12. But of course, it can, as usual, it can be slightly earlier, slightly later, and sometimes if a girl's already in quite a lot of training, it might be a little bit later, maybe more like 14. But there's a hard cut. If periods haven't started by the age of 15, we give this a medical name. We say primary amenorrhea, and we need to have a look and see what's going on. And then the woman should have regular menstrual cycles throughout her life, up until menopause when the ovaries retire, periods stop. But sometimes the periods might stop in between those years. It could be for a valid reason, as it were, a physiological reason, like the woman's pregnant, so
Yeah.
obviously periods stop. But if they stop and she's not pregnant, then that's when we need to look and see why the hormones taken time out. So there you go. There's a quick summary of what the menstrual cycle is and why it's important.
So you started that with the free check that your hormones are in
Yes.
order. And we've seen a push also for like wearable companies or even phones where you have all this tracking of your menstrual cycle. Is that something which, at face value, you would recommend women to do? Or is it maybe sometimes associated with um, dangerous behavior? Like, I don't know, maybe
Mm.
how do you see it? Would you recommend that for everyone or for certain people only?
I think every woman should be aware of her cycle and track it. And I'm very old. So when I was having menstrual cycles, we didn't have apps or anything like this. All we had was pen and paper.
Yep.
So that fundamentally, you just need to record it,
Okay.
right? Now, you can be the old fashioned way, just a pen and paper on your diary, you do a cross when you're having your period. And you might want to add in there any notes, how you feel during the cycle, because this is your data. Your data is how you feel during the menstrual cycle and when it's happening. So I don't mind how you do it. If you want to use an app, that's great. Or if you want to be old fashioned and pen and paper, because that was very good pen and paper because it's like non judgmental, right?
Yeah.
Some of the apps do irritate me slightly, I have to say, because they're very dogmatic. It's like, you are in the follicular phase. You now feel brilliant. And it's like, no, I don't. So, it's a little bit, can be a little bit rigid, shall we say. But on the other hand, I do understand if you're recording your training data, like, training or whatever it is, and your sleep, actually having it all in one place is quite good. So fundamentally, I don't think it matters how you record your cycle. And you mentioned that some women might be more anxious and things like this. And actually, for these women, I suggest the old fashioned that I used to do, pen and paper. But the reason for having a record is that you might think, well, I'll remember, but actually, you don't, you forget. So, knowing, okay, oh, yes, I've had a period. This is about, 4 weeks later, I'm having another period. So you have an idea, so that if I come and ask the athlete, they can report to me. Oh yes, yes, I've recorded, and I'm having regular periods. Or oh, actually, I there was a gap here, and I don't know why. Or if you're noticing recurring, how you're feeling. So, for example, if every single menstrual cycle, or quite a lot of the majority of the menstrual cycles, you record that you personally are feeling really tired during the luteal phase, actually, that's quite a good indicator, you see. So, definitely, I would think any woman, whether you're exercising or not, it's useful to keep a record and just some notes about how you're feeling to build up the database for yourself, but how exactly you do it is entirely up to you. I'm medical advisor to Scottish Ballet, that ballet company. And when I started there several years ago, I was quite surprised they weren't encouraging their dancers to record their cycle. So I said, fine. And I made them their own. I made an in-house app,
Wow.
which is non-judgmental, right? And also I made it clear the only person that you can see this information is you and me, right? So no one else can see it. And I'm just asking you, tell me when your period is, tell me how you're feeling, make any notes during your cycle, and we can build up a picture of uh just as you're logging your training. And so the the reason why you're doing this is because you get to know your own body, right? And any potential problems in the cycle, and also you can be predictive. So you have a date set in the diary, the opening night of Swan Lake, or you've got an important match or competition. Right, this is in the diary in so many months' time, and you're going to predict, oh, actually that might fall when I'm in the luteal phase of my cycle. And up until now, I've been noticing that in that luteal phase, I'm feeling really tired and not so great. So then we can prepare in advance and say, okay, let's try out some strategies to make you, so you can train and feel good during this luteal phase. So that's why you're doing it, to collect your own information and to use it as a training metric.
Okay. And so again, going a bit back because there are so
Mhm.
many things I would want to expand on. So the theory and the research always works kind of, or always presents a very even picture of that it's always 28 days long, and you
Mm.
always right, and you always have it after 14 days you get ovulation
Yes,
and
yes,
so
yes,
on and
yes.
so forth. Um, how true is that? And like, will it vary per cycle by a few days, or does sport really like affect the kind of the
Mm.
periodicity of that, or how do you see it in practice versus how it's presented in theory?
Well, this goes back to your point. Would recording the cycle cause
Mm.
concern? Because if you go in there with a fixed idea, or you're being told it's 28 days, and like you say, very rigid, da 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 da. That's not how biology works. I mean, it's amazing the timing, but it's not that like that. And by the way, the average cycle length is 29 days. It's not even 28. The reason it's 28 because it looks nice on the graph. It looks lovely symmetrical. 28, put the middle as 14. Do you see what I mean? It
Yeah.
looks nice, right? But actually it's not accurate. So a few points. Number one, the length of the cycle overall can vary, and as you say, from woman to woman, and even from cycle to cycle. The full range would be 22 to 35 days. Although I have to say, most women tend to hang around their personal number. Mine used to be 26 days, give or take a day or two. But still, women shouldn't get too panicked if it changes a lot. Some women are very, very absolutely exact 26, 26, 26, but others might be 26, maybe 29. You know what I mean? It's sort of, so it is a very, number one, the length is variable uh, between women and even between cycles. That's number one point. And the second point is it is not this beautiful symmetrical thing, right? We published a study, I think it's about a year or so ago, where we looked at the blood test from 30 women who had a blood test every single day of their cycle, poor things, right? Anyway, and we found that why do some women have this a shorter cycle, 24 days, and why do women have a 34-day cycle? That's 10-day difference. That's big. What's the cause of that? And we found that the main source of variation is in that follicular phase, in the build up to ovulation. That's where the main variability will be, the follicular phase. Either you've got a shorter one or an average, average, whatever, or a longer one. Once you've ovulated, then that luteal phase is truly pretty fixed, right?
Mhm.
About 14, 12 days, that is pretty fixed, but the variation comes at the beginning. So I think this goes back to your comment at the very beginning. Are there downsides of recording your menstrual cycle, especially on an app? Well, I suppose potentially yes. If you have been, if you believe, or you're being presented the situation that you described, that every cycle has to be 28, every cycle is beautifully symmetrical, then of course you would get, because you're not going to record that. I can tell you right now, that will
Mm.
not happen. Okay, that's not going to happen, and so you could get anxious that there's something wrong. But knowing that there is variation, we all know this. There's variation in life in general, isn't there? So that's a very important point that you make. Yeah.
When you look at this problem from a pure theoretical perspective, so if we disengage a bit from your relationship or your experience with athletes or women in
Mhm.
general, do you see this as a problem where training should be adapted based on the menstrual cycle? Like, from a purely theoretical scientific perspective, would you go into the discussion thinking that yes, maybe we should periodize our training?
Well, the thing is, we have to listen, let's be practical about this. So, like I just discussed, with the dancers, it is a personalized approach, because there's no point uh, you know, adapting the training if actually the athlete says they're feeling fine throughout the cycle. That's like
Mm.
great. But for some athletes where they say they are feeling particularly fatigued or very hungry in the luteal phase, it's like great. Well, let's make sure you're eating a little bit more carbohydrate during that phase of the cycle. So you're going to try and find out where there's a problem for that individual, and then try and deal with it, whatever that might be. Is it a very painful period? Okay, let's maybe we need to talk about anti-inflammatories. You see what I mean? So the situation is a personalized approach, because when you say should we periodize the training, in the real world, you cannot have, say you've got a group of 30 or 40 athletes, and they're all women, you cannot have a separate training program for 40 of them. It's not possible, is it? So you have to have the overall training schedule, but then for the individual woman, and then you're going to try and look at little adjustments that might help her, do the training schedule, right? Because it's not going to be exactly um You see what I mean? We
Yep,
can't adjust
of
the
course.
schedule for every individual, so we just got to see what we can do to help that woman to basically, like I said at the beginning, perform to her best throughout her cycle wherever she is. But also it helps if the coach is understanding. And if despite her best efforts, the female athletes, you know, eating extra bananas like I've suggested during the luteal phase, but she's still feeling really tired, then sure, at that point, if the coach is really good, she will feel comfortable saying, "Look, I'm really struggling right now in this for this block of training. So, I in certain bits where whatever the training schedule is, I might just have to go a little bit easier or something like that." So I think it's having that conversation, trying your best to make sure you can perform to your best, but ultimately also having that conversation with the coach so that the coach understands. It's not going to be, I hope no coach is shouting at their athletes, but you know what I mean, saying, come on, it's like, okay, they know in advance that actually this athlete's just having a little bit of a tough day, so then just going to let them do their thing. So I think that's really the reality, the practicality of this. But it's got to be on how the woman feels. It can't be on, blood tests and all this sort of thing, because how you respond to those hormones, that's the most crucial thing. So I know there's a lot of uh, how to say, anxiety. How are we going to know where they are in the cycle? And we've got to do a blood test and this. It's like, well, listen, the person that can tell you how they're feeling and responding to their hormones is the individual woman. So just ask them.
Right. I wanted to maybe go back a bit to something you said earlier that link it to something now. And although we'll talk about the coaching part also in greater detail
Mm,
later, you kind of mentioned that the coach might know that a certain woman or
mm,
whatever suffers from maybe harder symptoms or,
mm,
cramping or stuff like that. And earlier you said when you introduced the first tracking application for menstrual cycles in your ballet group, it was only for you and the athlete.
mm.
Um, what do you think is maybe a better approach? Like, should the coach know? Should they not know? Does it depend on who the coach is?
Well, I would like to think that um, the athlete would feel comfortable um, discussing with the coach or outlining. I mean, I'm sure the coach has got many other things to do. They don't want to be looking at the menstrual tracking of every single one of their athlete under their care. They haven't got the time to do that. So I think it's the responsibility, the individual athlete. It's her data. She records, she makes notes, she does whatever. If she's lucky to be in a situation where there's a doctor that's there, then of course she can share that with them. But otherwise, it's her data, it's her information, and she can then communicate to the coach and say, look, I've been tracking my cycles, seeing how I'm feeling, da da da, and I'm doing all these things, but actually I've noticed that nevertheless still struggle here. And so to warn them, okay, this week I'm just going to have to, just calm it down a bit, or whatever it is, or do less intensity, or whatever it might be. So I think that the data should always, it's the property of the woman, but then it's up to her how she communicates that with the coach. And I have to say, I work with a lot of coaches and dance teachers and artistic directors, for example, who are absolutely excellent in this regard. And they're delighted and they make it an easy conversation. They're not phased if a female athlete comes and tells them about their menstrual cycle. Obviously, we have to be careful if the athlete is under 16, then it's got to be with the parent, etc., etc. Right. But I'm personally seeing very encouraged. I'm seeing a lot of excellent coaches who are and hopefully this podcast will also help, who are feeling, that we're not expecting the coach to be a doctor, but we're just expecting the coach to, and hoping that the coach will listen to what the athlete is saying. She's saying something about her menstrual cycle, and just for example, if it was a male athlete that was returning from injury, you're going to expect the same thing. That the coach will listen, and the athlete will be saying, "Look, I'm recovering from injury, and I've been advised, not to do X, Y, or Z, or something like this from the physio." So, you see what I mean? So, it's fundamentally the coach is listening and appreciative of the individual athlete, and will listen to them. They don't have to give them, and it's up to the athlete how much detail they want to give them. You know, um, If they want to give them their menstrual tracking, that's their choice. But I suspect that most coaches will be very happy if the athlete explains and says, "Look, I've been tracking this, and this is what I've noticed," and whatever. So it's building up that trust and confidence and communication with the coach. But obviously, that doesn't happen overnight. So it's got to be, that mutual respect. I think is really the key thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's treating human like humans, right? Like
Yeah,
at the end of
exactly.
the day, I mean, it may be ugly to say it this way, but it's as you said, if it would have been an injury or any other kind of
Yes.
physical issue, you would want to share it. And
Mm.
not that's not to say that the menstrual cycle is an injury, but I mean, it has effects. I mean, if you
Yeah.
have life stress, maybe can also be
Oh, yeah,
another
yeah,
thing.
exactly, exactly. So if in the same way as if something happened, as you say, in a major event in for the athlete in their life, something that they hopefully have tell the coach, look, actually this week I'm really distracted because I've got lots of exams, I haven't had much sleep, or someone in my family is very ill. So it's just having that degree of trust and communication with your coach, which has to be built on. I accept that. But you're in control as the female athlete. How much you want to say. But definitely do say something.
Right.
But it depends on the coach. Some coaches just want to hear what the athlete suggests, right? But other coaches will want to listen more and know more details, and so it really depends on that communication.
I was looking at some studies, and again on this, like there are some ideas or some papers kind of which say that depending on various stages, you might be more receptive to a certain type of training or a certain type of injury. I've seen, for example, strength training benefits or greater degree of ACL injuries.
Hmm.
Again, we said that it might be difficult to periodize or to change the training for a group of women, and now maybe I'm thinking like a soccer team, so like a football team.
Hmm.
Of course, there it is difficult, but maybe in a case where you have a one-to-one relationship with a coach athlete, maybe it's an individual sport. Um, do you think those are things which you should keep in mind, or are the numbers, the effect so small that
Well, you know what I'm going to say. It's
yeah,
individual, personal, and also that research. For example, the ACL injury, anterior cruciate ligament injury. Theoretically, and in some studies, it's true. When the estrogen really goes high just before ovulation, that does have an effect on the collagen, and potentially, therefore, theoretically, the athlete might be more at risk of the ACL injury at that point. But, and this is the big but, I've just told you that the main source of variation in the menstrual cycle is in that follicular phase. So how the heck do you know if they're in that late follicular and the estrogen's ramping up? Right? So I think this is why there are lots of conflicting studies on this. Some studies say yes, some studies say no, but actually it's a timing issue. And also the other crucial thing, remember I said it's individual biological response to the hormones. So, with the basically the jury is out on that ACL piece, because there's an equal number of studies that say yes, equal to say no. And so, I think it goes back to um, how the woman is feeling, rather than, because this is, like you said, adding to the anxiety. It's like, oh my goodness, I
absolutely.
wonder what my hormones are, where I'm in the cycle. It's actually that adds to the anxiety, you see. And so just having, if you're in the nice situation where you've got a one-to-one athlete and coach, that's great. Then you can look at the cycle, look at the patterns, how they're feeling, and all that sort of thing. But I don't think you should be necessarily driven or directed by what you think the hormone level might be, because you think you know where you are in the
Absolutely.
cycle, and what theoretically your individual response to those hormones might be. So I think it just goes back to that individual approach. I mean, it sounds strange because I love hormones, I love measurements, I always want to know the numbers, but this is a situation where actually sometimes it can cause more anxiety, more stress, and frankly can be inaccurate. So going back to the fundamental of seeing how the woman's feeling during her cycle, that's probably is the most valuable lesson in this. And if you have the luxury of a one-to-one, then of course you can go into more detail, and you can, you know, uh, change the training schedule maybe, but it's based on how the woman says she's feeling, right? Just as you would in other things. If the woman said, "Gosh, I've really had a dreadful night's sleep, no sleep, or something, or I'm ill," then of course you're not gonna necessarily do the training session as was planned for that individual. You're gonna make it a little bit different.
Yeah. And you've been emphasizing, rightly so, the individual piece, right? To essentially, if you can, tailor the training towards the
Mm,
individual. Um, are there guidelines which differ per sport or for different sports? So, um, again, I'm kind of
mhm,
contradicting the individuality piece, but is there a concept or an idea where maybe you would apply a certain type of training or not apply a certain type of training in maybe a shorter, like for example a soccer football, where maybe the training will be up to 1 or 2 hours, because in the context of kind of my sport where it's endurance running, you might have people doing 5, 6, 7, 8+ hours of exercise within a day.
mm.
um, does this factor in the intensity or the duration of the exercise, or is it still really individual?
Well, that's a good question because the training load is duration times intensity. So you've got two things going on here. So, I mean, if we are going to go on anything, again, theoretically, during that later follicular phase when the estrogen's ramping up, the anabolic hormone, that could be a good time, if you're feeling good, to do the strength training because that's when you could potentially get the most benefits. And if you're doing more of an endurance thing during the luteal phase, then you will need to have a higher demand for carbohydrate because that's the main fuel source, and you need an increased amount of carbohydrate because the metabolic rate's raised. So coming back to your question of individual sports, um, that those are some rough ideas.
Okay.
That if even endurance runners, I hope you're doing strength training, and maybe if you probably don't like it, but anyway, the strength training. If you're going to do it, then and you're feeling good, then doing it in that late follicular. You don't have to measure your hormones. It's just how do you feel? Do you feel like strong? And that's a good time. And also, but on the other hand, if you're doing more of an endurance uh, type of training, then you need more carbs during the luteal phase. But I think all these sports, like we said, I said, even endurance sports, you do some strength work, and even if it's more sprint type work, like in soccer, you're still going to be doing strength work and still going to be doing some endurance work. So, fitness isn't just one type of fitness, even though it might be your focus endurance, strength, whatever, anaerobic, let's call it sprint work, you're still going to during that your training have to cover all the elements of fitness: cardiovascular, muscle strength, muscle endurance, proprioception, flexibility, all these things, technique, motor skills. So you've got all these elements of fitness you need sort of ticking off, but the exact proportions will vary according to the sport. And when you do your strength session, if you've got a choice, then that would also be a consideration when are you going to when if you've got an option when to do your strength training. And for you as a woman, you feel good during that late follicular time, then try and do the strength training there, you see.
Right, right. You mentioned it also a bit earlier. The while tracking your menstrual cycle, you might know that you might have a competition or an event
Mm,
on a time where you particularly don't feel good.
mm.
So maybe the question here is, how do you deal with an athlete who has maybe significant post-menstrual syndrome symptoms? How do you deal with it? I mean, of course, you can't get out of the competition, or
Yeah, quite.
so, like, what are the techniques there? How do you advise that athlete? Are there some hints or tricks or?
Mm. So in general terms, the two main flashpoints in the menstrual cycle are, like you said, the menstruation bit itself and the luteal phase, PMS. So for the menstruation bit, if the woman, gets a lot of cramp and stuff like this, then before she comes to the competition, we're going to work out ways of dealing with this. So it's like stay hydrated, make sure you've got good iron content in your food and all that sort of thing because you're losing blood, right? And also, let's try out all the ways of minute or reducing the problematic cramps. Let's try some anti-inflammatories, okay? Always taken with food, of course. Let's try some stretching things, doing gentle exercise. So give them the confidence, the tools. So we're going to try and manage those symptoms. We're going to do lots of dress rehearsals, basically, practices, right? And then for the PMS, which is the other typical flashpoint in the cycle. So here you might be experiencing breast tenderness, sort of sluggishness, feeling very hot, things like this. So here for the luteal phase, that the main thing to remember is you need more energy. Your metabolic rate increases because of progesterone. Okay, so so you're going to have to anticipate. So it depends on the woman, but maybe an extra banana at the least a day, something like this, rather than leaving it until you feel really starving hungry. And then you're sort of in a bit of a panic, and then you just sort of scoff down a whole chocolate bar. So, which is, I mean, I'm not nothing against chocolate, but it probably would have been better if you've had the banana in advance, knowing that, and then sure you have just a square of chocolate if you want, you know. And for breast tenderness, evening primrose oil can help. And if the woman's really having PMS, things like low mood and all this sort of thing, then the Royal College of Obstetrics Gynecology recommend chasteberry. So, you know, there are some strategies we can try in advance of the competition, dress rehearsals, because it always surprises me as an athlete, you're going to turn up for your competition day. I'm thinking about dancers, you have your favorite pair of point shoes you're going to wear, you've gone to done the dress rehearsal, the tech rehearsal, you got your costume, you've rehearsed the steps, everything, but why have you not rehearsed what you're going to do during that phase of the menstrual cycle, you see? So I think making it part of your preparation for a competition or a race or a performance, it's part of being a serious athlete, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's looking at the event holistically, right,
Yes,
and on all
exactly.
its factors and
Facets, yeah.
conditions,
Mhm.
facets, yeah, and dealing with it like that. Yeah, I think it's entirely logical, but again, it's probably an individual question on when to treat it when the athlete maybe already doesn't suffer from bad symptoms.
Well, if they don't, if they're feeling fine, then
Yeah,
actually that's great. There's not a problem. Just keep taking vitamin D; is very helpful supplement. Just that's fine. Don't look for problems where there aren't any. But if you have been tracking like for, well, ideally, a long time before the event, and you notice that there's a pattern where you, particular bit in your cycle where you're struggling, then this is great, important information, and you can start to practice strategies alongside. So endurance running, I know, for example, you always make sure you can fuel, and you don't want to try some new gel or something on the day, do you? Because it's got a gastric
exactly.
upset. So you're going to practice and try out a few things, and you feel confident in your schedule of how you're going to fuel. So it's part of this whole process at whatever level you're competing, by the way, not just professionals, but if you're an amateur and you just want to put in a good performance, it's part of that whole process to have explored and thought about everything in advance. And then you're going to, then the point is, then you're going to start on that start line. You're standing there at the start line feeling really confident psychologically. You've ticked your fueling strategy, you got the correct equipment and your good run shoes or whatever it is. You know what the course is, you're not going to get lost, and you feel confident. You've done everything you can within your power with the menstrual cycle. So then that will, just apart from anything, give you a massive psychological boost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the menopause time.
Mm,
This is also probably another I don't maybe key moment is I don't know if it's the right or the wrong word. Also brings around a lot of hormonal changes, as you mentioned
mm,
earlier. How should athletes approaching that age where they're approaching menopause start dealing with this discussion or this issue? Also, in light of their training, right? Should
mm,
their training change at all? Like, how would you advise
Mhm.
athletes to approach this time?
Well, menopause is every woman in her lifetime at some point will experience that. So, yeah, as you say, it's a physiological event, but it's quite a big deal because the hormones change dramatically. From you go from having this beautiful hormone choreography, hopefully you've had all these menstrual cycles, and then your ovaries are going to retire and they're going to stop doing that. But the real challenging thing is it's not like an on-off switch. You don't go one day you're having regular menstrual cycle and the next day it's finished. There's the lead up to it called perimenopause. It's like the ovaries are part-time. Some cycles will be like as you normally experience them, and others will be like, oh my goodness, worse periods, more painful, heavier, worse PMS, and it's very unpredictable. So actually, that is the most is quite a challenge. So the first thing is be prepared. Know that it is for every woman a challenge, but that as a woman, I know that we're resourceful, find the solutions. So the first thing is to recognize it and not getting in a panic. So typically perimenopause starts in the 40s, something like this. Menopause happens at 51. The ovaries, that's the average age the ovaries retire. So if you start feeling like really not yourself, like you're feeling come over really hot, your periods are a little bit irregular, you've got worse PMS, you're just not feeling yourself, it can be really scary. You wonder what's wrong with you. You think you're ill. But actually, if you recognize, oh, okay, this is probably perimenopause, and then you feel a little bit more certain about what's going on. And so the top tips are: number one, recognize, don't panic. But then, in terms of from the athlete's point of view, this is also a little wake up call. I have lots of lovely athletes that come to me. They're 48 women saying, "Oh gosh, I don't know what's happening to me. My periods have gone all over the shop, and I'm doing the same training I did when I was 21, but I can't get the performance." It's like, yeah, because your hormones are not the same as they were when you're 21. So the top tips are: number one, quality over quantity in terms of exercise. And I know endurance running, endurance sports, you love doing your high training low, long, long, but actually it is really is the quality. So it'd be better to do less long runs and put in instead a focused strength session, right? So quality over quantity. And also you're going to need more recovery. Okay. So hopefully everyone has having at least one rest day per week, because the rest day, I'm renaming rest days, by the way. I'm calling them positive adaptation days because that's when your hormones drive positive adaptations. So you're not being weak and feeble, but you might need more than one now as you're getting older, okay? Because your hormones are changed and lower, especially the anabolic ones. So need to give them more chance. So quality over quantity, more strength training, that's really important to boost the anabolic hormones, and probably you will need more positive adaptation days. In terms of nutrition, uh, as we get older, we should eat more protein to resist the loss of muscle. Um, if you sit down and do nothing, I'm afraid that yeah, you're going to lose bone mass, you'll lose muscle mass, you'll gain fat. If you do nothing, but if you are proactive and say, right, I recognize this, I'm going to do, my strength training, I'm going to increase my protein, I'm going to, change things a little bit. I think looking on it as a positive opportunity, as a spring clean, because also you might have got into bad habits, by the way.
Yeah.
Right? So I think having that positive attitude and those simple things about the training and the nutrition, that's really the place to start.
So we've been talking a lot for 30 minutes about modifying or not modifying your training based on the athlete's menstrual cycle. And now I
Mhm,
want to flip the discussion kind of 180.
mhm.
Um, are there cases where your training affects your menstrual cycle and that is a positive thing, or is it always and exclusively a negative thing?
Well, no, it's a positive thing because there's research to show that if you do have bad menstrual pain, doing exercise actually is helpful because
Okay.
basically when you're menstruating, there's lots of inflammation, stuff like this. And if you're exercising, blood flow, you see, get the inflammatory markers going, help with all that sort of thing, right? It's basically like cramp. It's like or when you get a stitch, it's because the blood flow isn't so good. So actually, there is a positive effect of training on menstrual symptoms like the menstruation. Also, during that, if you've got PMS, actually getting out, rather than just sort of thinking, oh gosh, I don't want to do anything. Just the lower training session, but getting out, especially fresh air, all that sort of thing. So training can help with the menstrual cycle. But as you said, the opposite way around can also happen. If you are by overtraining under recovery, I mean it's this sort of similar thing. If you're training so much, but you're not giving your body sufficient time to adapt and drive positive changes, and maybe that also means if you're doing so much training, you're not fueling sufficiently. So if you are overdoing the training, underdoing the fueling, then the body will adapt. Again, it's an adaptation, right? The body responds to what you put in. At this point, I want to quote Hippocrates. He would have been an excellent coach. He said, if we could give every individual, this is 2,000 years ago, it's pretty important stuff. He said, if we could give every individual just the right amount of nourishment, just the right amount of exercise, not too little, not too much, we would have found the surest way to health. So, in other words, if you have too much training, and not enough rest and not enough fuel, then that will definitely cause the menstrual cycle to, adapt. And this could mean that the cycle stops entirely because it's a good way to save resources. You see, so the body's very sensible. It's like, okay, fine, there's a sort of a stressful situation, not enough energy, so we're going to have to adapt and go into eco mode, energy saving mode, and switch off the cycle. And obviously, we just said how brilliant the cycles are because of the hormones, for the bone health, for the muscles. So yeah, it's really interesting. The not too little, not too much
Yeah.
is the answer when it comes to exercise training.
So let's go a bit into that negative scenario and kind of it's what is now called kind of red S.
Mm,
And it very often gets kind of red S is noticed very often because essentially female athletes lose
hmm
their period.
Yep.
But that is kind of the extreme, right? When you've already pushed
Mm,
it way too much.
mm,
Are there symptoms that athletes can look out for or telltale signs beyond the kind of
mm.
general ideas of, yeah, I feel fatigued or I'm getting injured too often? I don't know.
Um, on that topic, maybe you could put in the show notes. We made a questionnaire. It's a web-based app, and there's a version for males and females, and you just answer a series of questions, which, like you said, uh, will get an idea if you're out of balanced, i.e., underfueled or overtrained. And some of those questions will be, yes, fatigued, not good sleep, because if you're low in energy, actually your body's in a state of high alert, so you can't sleep very well. Yeah, more fatigue than you would expect. I suppose because if you're training a lot, then obviously you will feel tired, but more than you would expect, if you see what I mean. Okay. Um, yeah, the menstrual cycle, as you say, when it stops entirely, that's definitely a big red flag. But leading up to that, you might notice some irregularity and it's big gaps, changing gaps, like changing a lot and or maybe very spaced out. So there will be some early indicators, and like you say, injury, not just bone stress injuries, but also soft tissue injuries are more likely. If it makes sense if you haven't got the resources to deal
Absolutely.
with these things. So these are some of the key things, and also mood because the hormones are important for the brain. So all of these little subtle things, and also your attitude. Are you feeling really um are you have you do have any degree of exercise dependence, so where you feel really bad if you can't train? I mean, I kind of understand because I feel really upset if I can't do my ballet class, but unreasonably so, to the degree that you would make an excuse not to go to a social thing or something like this because you're going to miss a training session. You're very, very rigid. This could be an indicator. And also your eating patterns. Are you very rigid about your eating patterns? It's a really tricky one, but these are early sort of warning signs that this could develop into something more. And what we're trying to do is to avoid the extreme, the reds. The reds is when it has now come home to roost, as it were. The effects of overtraining, under recovery, under fueling. Now, as you say, the periods will entirely stop, and you're going to get bone stress injuries, and we see the consequences. The aim is to pick this up early, and that's what this questionnaire, we call it the peak, personal energy availability questionnaire, or are you at your peak performance? So it will give you an indicator. It's not a diagnostic tool, but I get all the athletes I'm working with to fill it in, so we get an idea. Are there any concerns or potential issues that we need to look into?
Yeah, I think I saw it on your website, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it
Yep.
will definitely be in the show notes for
Thank you.
anyone who's interested. That we can add for sure. Um, in the case that a female athlete does end up in the situation where she misses her period, and we
Mhm,
are kind of in that red flag territory,
mhm.
is the advice there to seek help from a general practitioner, an expert, a dietitian? What would you recommend there? Or is it something that the athlete, maybe alongside the coach, can work through?
Well, the first thing is, if a woman's periods have stopped, this is when you do need to, well, say you've done my questionnaire, and say actually it
Right.
looks like this probably is RED. You then need to go on and confirm that this is the case, because there are a couple of other reasons why your periods might stop, not least pregnancy, but also some other medical things. So actually, the first thing is, if there is a concern, the periods have stopped, and maybe some other symptoms, then actually you do need to get a blood test to make sure this is what we're dealing with. And one of the blood tests that's recommended by the IOC, International Olympic Committee, specifically gives an indicator of energy availability and confirms that the periods are switched off because of this situation. So the first thing is, we need to confirm the diagnosis and rule out anything else going on. And then, if that is the case, it's like, okay, fine, this is definitely REDS. Then the next steps are, well, if fundamentally the problem is not fueling enough, then obviously we need to address the fueling aspect and also dial down the intensity of the exercise, because that would be a stressor. Now, how you do that, it will depend. Some athletes will need more guidance and support than others. So I would love to say that they could do it by themselves or with the support of the coach, but I think in most cases there will be a psychological element to this. So they probably will need the support of a dietitian. And of course, I see athletes in this situation. So, seeing as you will need a blood test, then actually you could just sort of, that's what I offer as a doctor. It's like, these are the blood tests you need. We look at the blood tests, confirm reds. These are the principles. These are the things you need to work on, and give them a sort of a plan. This is what you need to do. And some athletes, for that, that's sufficient. They can do that. But others, where it's a bit more complicated, psychological factors, or they feel really unsure, then they will need more guidance, from a clinical dietitian or whoever it might be. And also, if they've got an injury, then they'll obviously need physio input as well. So, um, so it always goes back to what I say, is it's depends on the individual. It's a personalized
Absolutely.
approach, but fundamentally, at some point, you will need to see a doctor to get the blood test done. Now, how some general practitioners are very good, some are not.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean? You have to find out who it is. And certainly, if anyone is really struggling, then as I say, I offer advisory appointments wherever you are in the world, because I advise and at
Right.
least can point you in the right direction. And I've got a nice network of colleagues if we need, if the individual needs any further input from dietitians or a local doctor or whatever that might be.
Great. Yeah, I will also we will also talk about contact details near the end, and
Oh,
also
thank
all
you.
of your contact details will be in the description. Um, I've been hearing about this REDS concept or an idea kind of for
Hmm.
probably I would say around 8 years now,
Hmm.
which again is kind of I think it started like 10 or 12 years ago as a the formation of the word. How have we or how has the culture evolved sufficiently, in your opinion? I mean, sometimes we hear of these really terrible stories like the Oregon Project, where kind of
Mm,
situations, pressure situations, where female athletes losing their period is like a badge of honor, which
yeah, I know.
clearly we are saying it's not.
Yeah, yeah.
Has the culture moved forward sufficiently, or do you still feel that we're missing something?
There's always more to be done. And anyone who says is complacent and says, I know everything or everything is fixed, it's like, I don't trust them, you know? So, seriously, but you're right, in relative terms, it's quite recent. We had the female triad, but then we had Reds, which was described initially in 2014. You're right. So some time ago. And then we've had updates since then, 2018, 2022, I think was the last one. So for sure, there is improvement that I would definitely say, having been in this field for a long time. I'm seeing that there are more open conversations, and I'm especially encouraged some excellent coaches out there, and all this sort of thing. So definitely things have moved on. So I'm delighted to say that. But as ever, until you know, I'm never satisfied. I always want more, right? For the athlete's long term health. So there's always still more, and there's still some, as you say, old fashioned coaches, but also I old fashioned ideas out there. Like you said, the badge of honor, that I'm really trying to get rid of that. That it shows your dedication if your periods stop. It's like, no, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. No, all it shows is that your body is not happy. That's And so let's be clear about that, but trying to change the whole narrative, make it positive. Like I've said, your period, you should be so delighted every time. Free monthly medical check, barometer of internal healthy hormones. Use it as your training metric. Let's change the language about it, okay? And also, let's change the language about all this negative stuff about, oh, poor women having periods. It's like, oh dear, it's like, no, this is great. This is unique to a woman. You're having these cycles, and it's a good indicator of your health. Men don't have that. We do, and these hormones are great. So again, it's the culture, but it's also the positive attitude for the individual. Let's not make this out that female hormones are dreadful things. They're brilliant things. Let's talk about them in positive terms, and then that will also make the athlete feel positive about this whole situation, and gives them the courage to maybe challenge these old-fashioned views.
Last question, because I know we're a bit short on time. So we talked a lot about the coaching aspect and the coaching element, and you rightly so said that the data or the information about the athlete's menstrual cycle or their symptoms is theirs.
Mm,
If there is a coach who maybe notices as maybe more on a one-to-one relationship, where
mm,
notices, hey, this is maybe something which maybe they're noticing a trend or a pattern, or
mm,
they've been with this athlete for many years or for a few years, and they
mhm,
notice that maybe this is something which uh, they don't know yet, and they maybe want to
mm.
approach the discussion. How would you suggest these coaches that they approach the discussion, especially if the dynamic is a male coach with a female athlete? Would you try to bring in a third party here? Like,
Good question. So, obviously, if it's a young one, then of course you need the parents.
absolutely.
But it really depends. Because I know an excellent triathlon coach, and he has a very good relationship with his and very open relationship in the sense of professional, but discussing. And so in that case, lots of the female athletes would actually go straight to him and feel fine. But on the other hand, if you're new or you're not so sure about this, then the senior member of the team. So in this triathlon club, there was one of the athletes was actually an Olympian female athlete, really good, and so she took the others under her wing, as it were. So
Right.
she would go, as you say, the nominated sort of third person to be there supportive of the person. So I think it depends on the individual and also the coach. But I think if you're a female athlete and you're listening to this, or you're a male coach and you're wondering how am I going to approach this, then maybe that would put everyone more at their ease if there was a respected senior member of the team, a female athlete that could come to support, or sometimes there's a welfare officer even at these clubs. I was their welfare officer for a while, and so if you're a coach or an athlete and you want to have that conversation, but you just feel uncomfortable going like this, then actually, yes, make suggestions to for that athlete to come with a friend or with the senior member of the team or whatever it is, and then that makes it a little bit easier, maybe.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe the fact that the athlete hasn't disclosed this information maybe says that there's not, there isn't the underlying trust that there should be, and maybe that is also something to work around in that coach athlete relationship also.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so I think we're kind of running out of time here, so I will leave you with the final words. Where can people find you? Some of the kind of services that you offered. I also saw that you have published a few books. So, yeah, what would you want the listeners to know if they would like to contact you?
Sure. Well, please have a look on my website, nickykfitness.com, and the K is spelled Keay. Scottish spelling, apparently. Anyway, so on my website, you will see uh, the things I do. I offer, as I mentioned, individual advisory appointments to athletes, dancers, any level, any age. And then also I give talks. So, if you want me to come and talk to your club or whatever, then I'm open to that. So contact me for that. And then, yes, I've published two books. One is called Hormones, Health, and Human Potential. So it will discuss a lot of things we've gone through today. And then the other book is called Myths of Menopause, which is kind of self-explanatory, goes into all those the myth busting things there. And also on the website, if you're interested, there's also a list of all the publications, a few I've mentioned. So yes, please have a look at the website, and if you want to get in touch with regards to any of those things, there's a contact form on the website, or you can email me direct, same email, Nicky at nickykfitness.com. So, yeah, thank you so much. I want to say thank you for inviting me to speak, and I hope people found that useful. And I look forward to people, hopefully, people getting in contact with, requests, questions, whatever.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. I learned a lot, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners learned a lot also. So, thank you.
Brilliant.